Hi, and welcome back to Football Made Simple.
Manchester City have made a strong start to the Premier League season, aided by their star signing, Haaland. With 10 points after 4 games, as well as 6 goals and 1 assist for Haaland, things are looking up for City. But how have they been setting up tactically this season, and what role does Haaland play in that? In this video we take a look. So generally, City have started with a base 4-3-3. Some alterations are Gundogan can start in place of Bernardo, Ake has played fairly often this season, and Grealish can come in on the left wing as well. But the first major difference compared to last season comes in the build-up shape. Last season, the backline in the build-up would be a 3-2 shape, with Walker playing as the third centre-back. In addition, the winger could come in wide and Cancelo or Zinchenko could go wide, although they could invert as well. But the important thing is they did not have a traditional number 9 in Haaland, so often played with 2 false 9s. And this season with Haaland things are different. So instead of the 3-2 shape, it is now a 2-3 shape. So firstly, this means that Walker is playing much more in the midfield, and now it is Cancelo who almost always inverts into the midfield. In addition, the winger starts much wider, allowing an extra man to operate in the half spaces, almost at all times. As a result of this positioning, Cancelo and Walker are much more involved on the ball than they were last season. It's interesting to note the last time City used this exact shape was when they had another lethal number 9 in Aguero playing up front. So there are a few reasons Pep has opted for this shape. Firstly, Rodri has been coming on in leaps and bounds over the past couple of seasons, so he can now handle a greater load of responsibility to handle all of the progression, as well as a greater defensive load when looking to stop the transition. And when playing against City, particularly when City at home, most teams don't press the backline, so having 3 men deep may not be necessary. So instead, having an extra midfielder helps to create a midfield overload, as now they effectively have 5 in the central region. With excellent creative players in De Bruyne and Bernardo or Gundogan higher up the pitch means that the centre forward has a much greater volume of great passes coming into him from his number 10s behind him. And City do tend to build down the left hand side, and this shape gives them options. Cancelo can be the inverted midfielder, but at times we can see him push wide as Foden is also perfectly happy to be a creative player in the half space, and Bernardo or Gundogan are happy to play deeper. And speaking of Bernardo and Gundogan, last season they almost always were the second pivot alongside Rodri, but now in general they're operating much higher up the pitch. And the statistics show this, with both being less involved deeper in the pitch and showing much greater statistical impact in terms of their creative measures and goal scoring measures, as they are now in closer proximity to the centre forward and naturally have more opportunities to be in on goal. So naturally, with City having such a central overload, many teams tend to defend narrow against them. But even this situation often creates opportunity for City. First of all, with Cancelo narrow, the winger of the opposition tends to come in narrow as well to prevent that central overload. So we have seen Bernardo and Gundogan find success dropping into this pocket temporarily, to receive space out wide and then drive up the pitch into the space created, looking to create for their teammates higher up the pitch. So in the situation, as you can see, Walker and Cancelo are playing as the pivots, as Rodri happens to have dropped deep to help and create the overload. And like many teams, the Newcastle wingers are playing quite narrow, which creates space in this region. Gundogan is then able to drop in from the half space to receive in a bit of space, and then he can look to move higher up the pitch. But one thing that cannot be underestimated is the impact of Haaland. Watching him throughout the 90, he's always on the move, looking to make runs in behind the defense. This creates problems for both the opposition midfield and centre-backs. No team likes to see De Bruyne, Bernardo or Gundogan getting space between the lines, and as a result, in ideal situations many would like to compact this space as much as they could. But this naturally leads to teams playing with a higher line. So what happens in those situations is Haaland, with his pace and acceleration, can then be found running in behind the high line, to then have an opportunity on goal. So the natural response to this is to drop deeper in order to anticipate Haaland running in behind. This has now opened up more space in midfield for the number 10s to receive. And despite the space between the backline and the goalkeeper being smaller, what's special about Haaland is his acceleration over a short distance. So even with the centre-backs having dropped deeper, there is still the opportunity to find him in behind with a threaded pass, as we've seen many times. So here's a perfect example. The presence of Haaland in this region means that the centre-back cannot go and press Gundogan on the ball, and instead, he is occupied by Haaland. As a result, Gundogan is able to receive. And when he does, there is very limited space in behind the defense, but Gundogan is still able to find a pass, and Haaland's acceleration means he gets to the ball before the keeper, which then leads to a penalty. And that's not all that Haaland provides. Despite not being heavily involved in terms of on-the-ball contribution when City have possession, he can still drop into these deeper areas. And as teams are so worried about Haaland, he tends to draw a centre-back out of position. But with his strength, he can hold off the centre-back, and this has now created space for runners to then make the move in behind. And we've seen Haaland get assists and make opportunities in this manner. And this play does lead to a goal, but it's ruled offside, and we can see many of the principles. Haaland has dropped slightly deeper, and his presence means the centre-back is on him. As discussed, the City wingers are generally receiving in deeper regions, drawing the fullbacks higher up, so Gundogan can make runs in behind the fullback if needed. Haaland receives, drawing in the centre-back, and he makes the pass to Gundogan, who then eventually finds Kevin De Bruyne as he moves into the box. Many principles are visible here again. Bournemouth defending with narrow wingers, and Haaland at centre-forward is taking up many of the centre-backs. As a result, Gundogan is free, and it's Walker from this inverted midfield position who can find him. Gundogan then draws a man and is able to flick it round the corner to Haaland, and as we can see, space is created there, and Haaland is able to find the return ball into Gundogan, who can get on the end of it to finish. As discussed, City have rotated, as Cancelo has moved wide, this time it's De Bruyne who moves into the inverted position, and Foden is in the half space and can receive. Haaland yet again drops deep, and the centre-back has to make a move out towards him, vacating space in behind him. And as we can see, Haaland had created space either for himself or the man in the half space in De Bruyne to then look to get on the end of the ball, which he very nearly does. And the beauty of Haaland is that he doesn't even necessarily need to get on the ball. As discussed, he has excellent movement, so just by making a run, he can move centre-backs out of position as they look to anticipate his next move. This then creates more space for runners in behind, and as a result, this might be a very productive season for the men in the half spaces for City, with De Bruyne, Gundogan and Bernardo already putting up impressive numbers. And it's a simple move here but shows the effectiveness of Haaland, as in this situation, Newcastle look to have a well-structured back line. But as soon as Haaland makes the move deep, he draws the centre-back, and De Bruyne makes an excellent pass to Bernardo in the space vacated by the centre-back, and he's able to finish. But this shape is not perfect for City. At times we saw particularly Palace and Newcastle have success. Palace did so with a back five, which meant that the men in the half spaces could be covered more easily. But crucially, they had a midfield four, so their wingers would defend extremely narrow and join in to prevent that midfield overload. Newcastle, on the other hand, had a 4-5-1 when defending, but the general principle remained the same, with extremely narrow wingers joining the midfield, preventing that central overload. By having so many men in these positions, the men in the half spaces could be covered, while still looking to apply pressure on the men on the ball higher up. Walker has played this inverted midfielder position on many occasions for Pep, but still, under pressure, being on the ball is not his strongest suit, so there is potential of pressing him into making an error. And although having three central midfielders is meant to protect against the transition, at times, when the first line of defense is bypassed, City are very vulnerable with only two centre-backs, compared to the three they would have had in their 3-2 shape. In addition, in their 3-2 shape, Walker starts deeper and can use his impressive recovery pace much more effectively. But against Newcastle especially, we saw them have success attacking behind Walker, where even for a man as quick as him, it is still difficult to recover, and this led to many opportunities for Newcastle. So with oppositions defending so narrow, the wide regions become even more important for City. Firstly, it means that when they receive, there is a lot of potential for 1-versus-1s, and we often do see them receiving deeper as have to receive outside the central block. So this does have the potential to draw fullbacks higher up, creating space for men in the half space to make runs into. But in general, it will be these 1-versus-1 situations we see a lot out wide, so it will be a very important season for the likes of Mahrez, Foden, Grealish and Bernardo when he plays there to be highly effective in these scenarios. A perfect example of this was against Palace, where Mahrez was ineffective 1 versus 1 against his man, and City were behind during the first half. But as soon as Bernardo came wide, he had much better success on the day in getting at his man, which led to City completing the turnaround. But perhaps the biggest difference we've noticed so far this season is the switches. City do tend to build down the left-hand side in general. And naturally, as discussed, with the opposition midfield being so narrow, they do tend to move across as a block. In addition, the presence of Walker here means that the winger tends to be covering him rather than moving deeper. So, with the man always in the half space, the fullback can be drawn in central, and City can then find the winger out wide, either by first going to Walker, who then looks for that pass, or a direct switch out towards the wide man. And already it is interesting to note, last season they attempted 19 switches per game, and so far this season that has gone up to 24. So naturally, once the winger does receive, the fullback will come out, and we then tend to see the 1 versus 1 situations as discussed. So a lot of City's success depends on whether their man is able to get the best of the fullback on the day. And here we see the switch, but it also brings in other principles. As discussed, Gundogan is able to receive in this deeper left-hand side position. We can see that Saint-Maximin was still defending fairly narrow, possibly hoping to cover Kyle Walker. De Bruyne in the half space meant that the fullback could not come out to Bernardo immediately, and was instead covering him. So Gundogan is the man who gets the switch out towards Bernardo. Bernardo then gets on the ball in dangerous situations, and City do tend to overload the box when the ball is on the right, with Haaland, the left-sided 8, and the winger all coming in towards the back post. Here, the centre-back is occupied by Haaland, so Gundogan is able to get on the end of that cross. And here we have a similar situation, with City 2-0 down. Mahrez is in the half space and has drawn in the fullback, whilst Walker's positioning in the midfield means that Eze is also defending fairly narrow. As a result, Rodri can get the switch out to Bernardo in acres of space. Bernardo can then run at his man, go down the byline or cut inside, which is what he does, before he finds a finish to get City back into the game. But in a throwback to one of the best City sides in 17-18, when the winger does receive the ball and the fullback confronts them, this creates space for the man in the half space to make the run and receive, and then look for the cross to the centre forward or the men arriving at the back post. And here we have an alternative situation. De Bruyne is in the half space, and this time the West Ham fullback has anticipated the switch out towards Foden. But this has really stretched the defence, creating a massive gap between centre-back and fullback that De Bruyne can then run into, and Foden is able to find him easily. De Bruyne then gets the cross in, leading to a higher opportunity scoring situation for Gundogan, but the ball does go wide. But in the transition, City have been incredibly dangerous, led again by that man Haaland. First of all, if the opposition has committed too much to the attack, with De Bruyne often dropping deep, there is potential for the direct pass in behind using the pace of Haaland to then get 1 versus 1. But again, Haaland also shows that he's a multi-dimensional centre forward, so he can actually drop deep to be the man who receives the first pass. And of course he has that strength to hold off the centre backs, but at the same time the awareness to then find a midfielder or a winger running beyond him, again creating dangerous situations. As you can see, West Ham were in a more attacking situation and had committed men high up, so De Bruyne is able to receive on the transition. And this is a simple equation. Haaland's pure pace and De Bruyne's immaculate passing means that he's able to find him in behind, and Haaland finishes expertly. Again, Newcastle don't have their settled shape, so De Bruyne is able to receive between the lines, and Haaland had been dropping slightly deeper and draws the centre-back towards him, opening up more space for himself to run into. De Bruyne once again finds him, and Haaland makes up the distance easily. He leaves the defender in his wake, but he's unable to finish. It's 4 games in, but already we can see the impact that Haaland has made on this side, and Pep, as always, keeping his philosophy but tinkering with his tactics. These tactics may evolve over the course of the season, but I want to know what you think of City and Haaland so far. Drop it down in the comments below.
I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, you might enjoy the content available on my Patreon. Not only does Patreon help to support the continued production of content, as I am a one-man team, but it also gives you early access to videos that will come on the channel. You'll also get exclusive videos, get to vote on polls, and so much more. And it's cheaper than ever, no longer having a tier system, so everyone on the Patreon gets access to all the content. So head over to patreon.com/footballmadesimple to check it out.
And a special thanks to my patrons including Bradley E, Per Sandstorm, Moez Ben Darby, Robert O'Brien, and Ed Salem.